Cops laughed as I bled out, thinking I was worthless. I was an undercover prosecutor. 2 cops laughed and took photos as I bled out on the street, calling me a worthless junkie who deserved it and making me crawl to their patrol car. Then they found the wire taped to my ribs that said Property of District Attorney's Office, Special Crimes Unit, and realized I was the undercover prosecutor who'd been investigating a human trafficking ring for 6 months. My name is Isabella, and this is how I almost died doing my job. After getting stabbed during that 6-month undercover operation, I ended up crawling onto Maple Street with blood pouring between my fingers. The blade had gone deep, and I could feel my life draining away with each heartbeat. My tight red dress, part of my cover, was now soaked crimson. The wire that would blow my cover was still taped beneath my ribs, hidden under the fabric. Officers Rodriguez and Carter finally arrived, and relief washed over me until I saw how Rodriguez's face twisted when he registered my outfit. The disgust in his eyes hit harder than the blade had. Another hooker got herself stabbed, rolled off his tongue like he'd said it 1,000 times before. Carter was still stretching beside their Ford Crown Victoria while I bled out 10 feet away. They started pulling on gloves with zero urgency, and Rodriguez actually waved me forward like I was bothering him by dying too far from his vehicle. I pressed harder against the wound and made the choice to survive. My legs shook as I forced myself upright, because apparently bleeding to death wasn't enough to warrant them walking over. When I finally reached their patrol car, Rodriguez looked me up and down with cold assessment. "What did you expect working these streets?" he asked like we were having a casual conversation about the weather. I tried to speak but only managed to gasp out, "Please help," between waves of pain. Carter actually mimicked me in this high-pitched voice that made Rodriguez laugh. "We've heard every sob story, sweetheart. What happened? Your pimp rough you up? Job get too intense? Save the tears for someone who cares. You chose to sell yourself for money." My vision started tunneling, but Rodriguez wasn't done. "What's your real name?" When I struggled to answer through the pain, he made me repeat it 3 times while they both laughed. By the 3rd time, my hands were going numb, and I couldn't feel my fingers anymore. Rodriguez looked at me like I was literal garbage that had somehow learned to bleed. "These all have diseases," he said, backing away from the blood pooling around me. He grabbed his radio and I heard him tell dispatch they had a probable overdose. "Working girl, low priority." I forced myself to speak up, begging him to make it high priority, but he used his boot to push me back when I reached for him. Next thing I knew, he was tossing me a filthy rag from the gutter and telling me to apply pressure if I wasn't too high to function. Carter pulled out his phone. Perfect timing for my buddy in Vice who collects these photos. The camera flash felt like needles in my brain as they discussed my upcoming death like it was entertainment. That's when my body betrayed me with convulsions so violent they tore the wire from my ribs. The recording device slipped out from under my dress and crashed onto the asphalt. Both officers froze instantly. Carter stopped mid-sentence about "another dead junkie." Rodriguez's cruel laughter died in his throat. The device sat there recording everything, with Property of Dallas County District Attorney's Office etched clearly across the metal casing. They both recognized what they were looking at immediately. Rodriguez bent closer and read the full inscription aloud, "Special Crimes Unit." His face went from confused to horrified in seconds. "Oh God," he said, backing away from me like I'd suddenly become radioactive. "Oh God, no." Carter started shaking visibly. "The trafficking prosecutor," I heard him whisper before everything went black. The world spun back into focus with harsh fluorescent lights burning through my eyelids. My throat felt raw, and something plastic pressed against my face, an oxygen mask. The steady beeping of machines filled my ears as I tried to move, but lightning shot through my abdomen. A nurse appeared in my peripheral vision, adjusting an IV bag. She noticed my eyes tracking her movements and pressed a call button. Within minutes, Dr. Hawkins entered, followed by 2 detectives in suits, not uniforms. That was encouraging. Dr. Hawkins checked my vitals while explaining that I'd lost significant blood, but the surgery had gone well. The blade had missed major organs by millimeters. Lucky, he called it, though I didn't feel particularly fortunate. The detectives waited until he finished before introducing themselves as Internal Affairs. Detective Walsh, a woman with graying hair pulled back tight, took the lead. Over the next hour, they took my statement methodically. I gave them everything, from crawling onto Maple Street to Carter reading the inscription on my recording device. They exchanged meaningful glances when I described Rodriguez's comments about his teenage daughter and Carter taking photos for his buddy in Vice. Detective Walsh assured me the wire recording had survived intact. Every cruel word those officers said was preserved in digital clarity. My supervisor from the Special Crimes Unit, Director Thompson, arrived that afternoon looking exhausted, probably from damage control meetings. The trafficking case I'd spent 6 months building was compromised now that my cover was blown, but we'd gathered enough evidence for multiple arrests. He explained that Rodriguez and Carter were on administrative leave pending investigation. Standard procedure, he said, though the way his jaw tightened told me he wanted more immediate consequences. Word had already spread through the department about what happened. Some officers were appalled. Others were circling the wagons. Physical therapy started 3 days later. The therapist helped me take my first steps since the stabbing, supporting my weight as I shuffled down the hospital corridor. Each movement pulled at the stitches, but I forced myself forward. I had to get strong enough to see this through. My mother flew in from Phoenix, bringing clothes and toiletries from home. She tried to convince me to transfer there for recovery, maybe take a break from prosecution work. But we both knew I wasn't going anywhere. The real fight was just beginning, and Rodriguez and Carter had no idea what they'd unleashed. Internal Affairs returned on day 5 with follow-up questions. They'd reviewed the wire recording and needed clarification on certain timeline details. As we talked, I learned that Carter's friend in Vice was also under investigation now. Apparently, collecting photos of dying women wasn't his only disturbing hobby. A week into recovery, I had my first visitor from the department who wasn't there officially. Officer Martinez knocked hesitantly before entering. She'd heard about what happened and wanted to apologize on behalf of decent cops. Her partner waited in the hallway, equally uncomfortable but wanting to show support. Their visit opened floodgates. Over the next few days, officers from various departments stopped by. Some brought cards, others just wanted to express disgust at Rodriguez and Carter's behavior. A few admitted they'd witnessed similar attitudes but never reported it. The divide in the department was becoming crystal clear. 2 weeks after the stabbing, I was discharged with strict instructions to rest. My mother had prepared my apartment in downtown Dallas, stocking the refrigerator and setting up a recovery area in the living room. She'd taken leave from her teaching job to stay with me despite my protests. The first night home, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt Carter's thumb digging into my wrist. Heard Rodriguez comparing me to garbage. The wire recording played on repeat in my mind. I'd spent months training for undercover work, but nothing prepared me for being left to die by people sworn to protect and serve. My mother found me at the kitchen table at 3 a.m., laptop open to news articles about the incident. The department had released a carefully worded statement about officers under investigation for procedural violations. No mention of them assuming I was a sex worker. No mention of the photos or their commentary about rats and dumpsters. Why would 2 cops be so quick to write off someone bleeding on the street? I asked her while she made chamomile tea. There's something disturbing about how casual Rodriguez and Carter were, like they'd done this routine before. She listened without trying to fix anything, just letting me process the anger that pain medication had been numbing. The next morning brought a call from Internal Affairs. They needed me to come in for a formal recorded interview once I was medically cleared. The investigation was expanding. Other complaints about Rodriguez and Carter had surfaced, dating back years. Women who'd been dismissed, mocked, or mistreated. Most never filed official reports, knowing how it would go. 3 weeks post-stabbing, I returned to the courthouse for the Internal Affairs interview. Walking through the building felt different now. Conversations stopped when I passed. Some colleagues offered supportive nods. Others avoided eye contact entirely. The interview lasted 4 hours. They wanted every detail, every word, every moment from when I first encountered Rodriguez and Carter. I walked them through it methodically, keeping my voice steady even when describing the worst parts. When we finished, Detective Walsh informed me that Rodriguez had hired a high-powered attorney and was fighting the administrative leave. Carter was cooperating but downplaying everything as a misunderstanding. The real battle was just beginning. That evening, my phone rang with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Heavy breathing filled the line before a muffled voice spoke. "We know where you live. We know you're alone. Think carefully about pursuing this complaint. The line went dead. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt oddly calm as I called Internal Affairs to report the threat. They'd warned me something like this might happen. Officers under investigation sometimes had friends willing to intimidate witnesses. My mother overheard the call and immediately began researching security systems. By midnight, she'd ordered cameras, new locks, and a video doorbell. I let her channel her worry into action while I focused on what came next. A month after the stabbing, I was cleared for light duty. Returning to work felt like reclaiming part of myself. My desk had piled high with cards and messages of support from colleagues who'd reached out during my absence. That afternoon, word spread through the office that Carter had been suspended without pay. The investigation into his vice department friend had uncovered disturbing behavior beyond just photo collecting. Rodriguez remained on administrative leave, still fighting through union channels. 6 weeks later, I encountered Carter at a Starbucks near the courthouse. He was in civilian clothes, looking haggard. We locked eyes across the room. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he grabbed his coffee and left without a word. My hands shook as I waited for my order. Outside, I spotted Carter sitting in his Honda Civic across the street, watching me through the windshield. He didn't look away when I noticed him. Instead, he slowly raised his phone and snapped a photo before driving off. The encounter left me rattled in ways the anonymous phone call hadn't. Carter showing up at my regular coffee shop felt deliberate, calculated to remind me he knew my routines. 2 days later, I received an envelope at my apartment with no return address. Inside were printouts of social media posts, photos from my college years at parties, casual drinks with friends, anything that could be misconstrued. A sticky note attached read, "Prosecutor or party girl? The jury will decide." I immediately forwarded everything to Internal Affairs and changed all my privacy settings. Detective Walsh seemed genuinely concerned this time. She mentioned that Carter had been seen meeting with Rodriguez despite orders to avoid contact during the investigation. The following week, I noticed a pattern. Whenever I left my apartment, a car would appear within minutes. Different vehicles, but always maintaining the same careful distance. They'd follow me to Whole Foods, CVS, physical therapy appointments, never close enough to prove stalking, but constant enough to ensure I knew they were there. One afternoon, returning from therapy, I found my apartment door slightly ajar. My blood ran cold. I backed away immediately and called 911 from the hallway. The responding officers cleared the apartment and found nothing missing, but someone had been inside. Small things were moved, a book shifted on the coffee table, papers rearranged on my desk. The message was clear: your locks mean nothing. The intimidation was escalating, but so was my resolve. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Carter's friend from Vice, Detective Murphy, had been arrested on unrelated child exploitation charges. Facing decades in prison, he offered to cooperate fully. His testimony revealed a whole network of officers who shared degrading photos and videos of victims. Carter wasn't just a participant, he was one of the most active contributors to what they called their trophy collection. Internal Affairs moved swiftly after that revelation. Search warrants were executed on both Rodriguez and Carter's homes. They found hundreds of photos on Carter's devices, including ones of me bleeding on Maple Street. The metadata proved they were taken while I was dying, not as official documentation. Rodriguez's computer contained emails joking about the incident, including one where he bragged about making me crawl to their patrol car like a wounded animal. But the harassment escalated before it stopped. A young patrol officer named Natasha reached out privately, asking to meet. Over coffee at a busy restaurant in Deep Ellum, she revealed that Carter had a reputation for taking photos at scenes involving sex workers. She'd reported it once but was told to mind her own business. Her courage inspired others. Within days, 3 more officers came forward with similar stories. One described Rodriguez making a game of delaying medical response for certain victims. Another had witnessed Carter planting evidence on women he claimed were soliciting. I compiled their statements and forwarded everything to Internal Affairs, but the network of corrupt officers wasn't going down quietly. Dead flowers appeared on my doorstep. My car tires were slashed in the supposedly secure parking garage. Someone spray-painted a crude message on my assigned parking spot. Director Thompson suggested I take leave until the investigation concluded. I refused. Backing down now would send the wrong message, that intimidation worked, that officers could escape accountability through fear tactics. The night everything changed, I was reviewing case files at home when I heard footsteps in the hallway. They stopped outside my door. I held my breath, hand on my phone, ready to call 911. The doorknob rattled slightly, then nothing. I waited 10 minutes before checking the peephole. The hallway was empty, but a new message was carved into my door: drop it. That's when I realized they weren't just trying to scare me anymore, they were preparing for something worse. I spent that night in a hotel, unable to shake the feeling that staying in my apartment was no longer safe. The next morning brought vindication. Carter had been arrested for violating a restraining order. He'd been caught on security footage near my old apartment building, not knowing I'd already moved. His desperation was making him sloppy. Rodriguez's situation was different. His attorney was negotiating, hinting at willingness to provide information about systemic corruption in exchange for lesser charges. The prospect disgusted me. He'd watched me dying and joked about it, and now he wanted a deal. But Internal Affairs was interested. Rodriguez had been on the force for 20 years. He knew where bodies were buried, figuratively speaking. The tide was finally turning, but the biggest battles still lay ahead. The preliminary hearing arrived faster than expected. I sat in the prosecutor's office reviewing my testimony while ADA Jennifer Hayes explained the process. Rodriguez and Carter would both be present, their first time seeing me since that night. She assured me security would be tight, but my hands still trembled as I signed the witness forms. That morning, I dressed carefully in a conservative navy suit that hid the scar. Natasha met me outside the courthouse, offering silent support. We walked through metal detectors together, past clusters of officers who either nodded respectfully or turned away. The divide in the department had become a chasm. Inside the courtroom, I kept my eyes forward as I took my seat. I could feel Rodriguez and Carter watching from the defense table, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of acknowledgement. Their lawyers sat beside them, expensive suits suggesting the union was funding their defense. ADA Hayes played the wire recording first. Rodriguez's voice filled the courtroom, clear and damning. Every cruel word, every laugh at my expense, every moment they'd left me bleeding echoed off the walls. Several people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. One officer actually left the room. When my turn came to testify, I walked to the stand steadily despite my racing heart. Hayes led me through that night methodically. I described crawling onto Maple Street, the blood loss, their refusal to help. I explained how Carter dug his thumb into my wrist while pretending to check my pulse, how Rodriguez kicked me back when I reached for help. The defense attorneys tried to shake my testimony. They questioned my memory, suggested the blood loss affected my perception. They implied I'd misunderstood their client's attempts to help. But the wire recording contradicted every excuse they offered. Their client's own words condemned them. During a break, I passed Rodriguez in the hallway. He started to speak, but his lawyer grabbed his arm and pulled him away. Carter kept his distance, but I caught him staring with an expression I couldn't read: regret, anger, fear. I didn't care anymore. The judge bound both officers over for trial on multiple charges: official misconduct, failure to render aid, evidence tampering, witness intimidation. Bail was set high enough that both would struggle to pay it. Carter cracked first. Facing decades in prison and abandoned by his former supporters, he offered to testify against Rodriguez in exchange for a plea deal. His cooperation unveiled more than anyone expected. The photo-sharing ring included 12 officers across 3 precincts. The main trial lasted 2 weeks. I testified for hours, describing that night in excruciating detail. The defense attorney questioned my memory, my motives, my interpretation of events. But the evidence spoke louder than their doubts. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, Carter stood as they read the verdict: guilty on all counts. The judge revoked his bail immediately as court officers led him away. He looked back at me once. I met his gaze steadily until he disappeared through the door. Sentencing came weeks later. Carter received 15 years. Rodriguez, due to his cooperation deal, got 8 years and lost his pension. Both would be registered as violent offenders. The verdicts triggered department-wide changes that would reshape law enforcement in Dallas. 1 year after the stabbing, I stood in my office preparing for another trial, this time as lead prosecutor, not victim. The trafficking unit had a new case, and I was ready. The department had implemented sweeping reforms. New oversight procedures, mandatory training on victim treatment, and a civilian review board with real power to investigate complaints. Progress came slowly, but it came. The trafficking ring I'd infiltrated was completely dismantled. 35 arrests, 28 convictions, dozens of young women freed from bondage. It was why I'd gone undercover in the first place, though the cost had been higher than anyone anticipated. My physical recovery had plateaued months earlier. The scar would always be there, a raised line across my abdomen that ached during weather changes. Certain movements still caused discomfort, but I could work full days, exercise moderately, and function almost normally. The psychological healing took longer. I'd been seeing Dr. Patricia Williams, a trauma specialist, for months. Unpacking that night, the pain, the humiliation, the casual cruelty, required patience. Some sessions left me raw and exhausted, but slowly I began processing the experience instead of just surviving it. Natasha made detective, one of the youngest in department history. We still met monthly for coffee, comparing notes on the department's evolution. She'd become a voice for reform from within, pushing for changes that would have seemed impossible before. Other victims of Rodriguez and Carter found closure in the verdicts. Some pursued civil suits. Others simply felt validated that their experiences mattered. The ripple effects of accountability spread through communities that had lost faith in justice. The hypervigilance was manageable now. I still checked locks multiple times and startled at unexpected sounds, but the nightmares came less frequently. I'd built a life around the trauma without letting it define me. Walking to court that morning, I passed the intersection where I'd bled on the concrete. The stain was long gone, but I knew exactly where it had been. I touched my abdomen briefly, feeling the scar through my shirt, then continued forward. Inside the courthouse, I sat up at the prosecution table. The defense attorney nodded professionally. The judge entered, and everyone rose. As I stood to make my opening statement, I felt the strength that comes from survival. Rodriguez and Carter had tried to let me die. Instead, their cruelty had exposed corruption that needed cutting out. The work continued, it always would. But now the department knew that leaving someone to die had consequences. That badges and uniforms didn't grant immunity from accountability. That victims' lives mattered regardless of assumptions or prejudices. I presented my case with confidence born from experience. Justice wasn't perfect or swift, but it was possible. The system could change, however slowly, and I would keep fighting, keep prosecuting, keep pushing for a world where no one bled out while officers laughed. That night, I returned home to my secure building. The doorman wished me good evening. In my apartment, I made dinner, checked my locks out of habit, and reviewed tomorrow's case files. Rodriguez and Carter were in prison. The department was changing. I was still here, still fighting. That was enough.